Take two slices of bread, cut from the exact same loaf. Same flour, same water, same yeast, same everything. Eat one fresh. Freeze the other. Thaw it, toast it, then eat that one too. Same ingredients, same weight. But inside your body, they don't behave the same way. One of them raises your blood sugar higher and faster than the other. Nothing was added to that bread. Nothing was removed. So what actually changed? Here's the thing about bread. Once it comes out of the oven, most of us assume it's done changing. Freezing just pauses it. Reheating just unpauses it. Simple. But bread is mostly starch. And starch is not a fixed, static ingredient. It's a molecule that can physically rearrange itself over and over, long after baking is finished. So the real question isn't, does freezing ruin bread? It's this, does changing bread's temperature, freezer, fridge, toaster, actually change how your body breaks it down? To answer that, we need to follow one thing closely, the starch. It starts in the oven. Raw starch inside dough exists as tightly packed granules, closed, ordered, hard for your body to digest. Heat and water force those granules to swell and burst open. Scientists call this gelatinization. It's the reason a slice of fresh bread is so easy for your body to break down. The starch has essentially been unlocked. But that unlocked state isn't permanent. As bread cools down, something quietly reverses. Those loosened starch molecules start finding each other again, rebonding into new, more tightly packed arrangements. This process is called retrogradation, and it's actually the main reason bread goes stale. Here's where it gets interesting. Some of that rebonded starch becomes structured tightly enough that your digestive enzymes struggle to reach it. It's not gone. It's not fiber. But it behaves differently. Some of it slips through your small intestine mostly untouched, instead of being absorbed as quickly as sugar. Food scientists call this resistant starch. So what does freezing actually do in all this? Mostly, it preserves whatever structure has already formed. Freezing doesn't dramatically create resistant starch out of nothing. It locks in place the rearrangement that cooling already started, slowing everything down at a molecular level. So does this actually matter for your body, or is it just chemistry trivia? In a study of 10 healthy adults, researchers measured blood sugar after eating fresh homemade white bread, then compared it to the same bread after freezing, thawing, and toasting. The fresh bread produced a notably higher 2-hour blood sugar response. The frozen thawed toasted bread produced a meaningfully lower one. Same loaf, same person, different curve. That's a real, measured human effect. Not huge, but real. Now here's the twist. If you assume the freezer is the most extreme environment for this starch rearrangement, you'd be wrong. In laboratory testing, bread stored in the refrigerator actually developed more of this restructured starch than bread stored in the freezer. The fridge, not the freezer, turned out to be the more aggressive environment for this process.
Why?
Because retrogradation needs some molecular movement to happen. The freezer slows molecules down almost completely. The fridge sits right in a temperature zone where those starch molecules can still move around just enough to reorganize, and they do it faster there than they do in the deep cold. Colder isn't always more. And reheating doesn't simply undo all of this, either. Heat can partially melt some of those restructured starch bundles back open, but not all of them. Some structures are more heat-resistant than others. So, frozen and reheated bread isn't the same as fresh bread, and it isn't quite the same as bread eaten cold, straight from the freezer. It's its own in-between state. So, does freezing and reheating actually change how your body digests bread?
Yes.
Measurably. The evidence shows a real shift in how fast sugar enters your bloodstream. But it's a modest shift, not a dramatic one, and it depends entirely on how the bread was cooled, stored, and reheated. What this isn't a calorie hack, a way to turn bread into fiber, or a free pass for people managing blood sugar. What it actually is stranger and smaller than the myths, proof that a loaf of bread never really stops changing once it leaves the oven. Every trip through your freezer, your fridge, or your toaster is just one more chapter in a molecular story that started the moment the heat first hit the dough. Freezing bread doesn't magically make it healthier, but it can change how some of its starch is digested. And that's just one example of how much is happening beneath the surface of everyday food. What should we explain next? The food you know, the questions you've never asked,